The summer after I turned 21, took a job working in the fire lookout tower in northern Montana. At the time, it sounded perfect. I dropped out of college a few months earlier, was broke, and honestly wanted to get away from the people for a while. When I found an ad looking for seasonal fire watchers, I figured it'd be mostly sitting around, reading books, and watching sunsets. The ranger station warned me the tower was isolated. I just didn't understand how isolated until I got there. The tower stood on top of a mountain ridge, surrounded by miles of forest in every direction. Drive up took nearly 3 hours on dirt roads. The last stretch had to be done on foot because the path was too narrow for vehicles. The lookout itself was old, not abandoned old, just forgotten. The wooden stairs creaked constantly, and the whole structure swayed slightly whenever the wind picked up. Inside was a cot, radio, shelves full of weather logs, and windows wrapping around the entire room so I could see the whole forest. The ranger who dropped me off gave me a quick rundown before leaving. Radio check-ins every 4 hours. Watch for smoke. Don't leave the tower after dark unless it's an emergency. I laughed a little when he said that last part, but he didn't. Then he climbed back into his truck and disappeared down the mountain. Just like that, I was alone. The first few days were peaceful. Honestly, beautiful. Every morning the fog rolled in, through the trees beneath the tower like waves across an ocean. During the day, I'd scan the forest with my binoculars, log weather conditions, and read paperbacks whenever nothing was happening. At night, the woods became unbelievably dark. The kind where flashlights feel too small. But after a while, I started noticing things that didn't make sense. The first thing was the footprints. Every morning, there'd be muddy prints around the base of the tower. At first, I assumed they belonged to hikers. But there were never any other tracks leading away from the area. Just footprints circling the tower. Like someone had walked around it repeatedly during the night. I reported it over the radio one afternoon. The ranger just said, "Probably an animal." I remember looking down at the prints while holding the radio. They definitely weren't animal tracks. The second strange thing happened about a week later. Around midnight, I woke up to a metallic sound echoing through the tower. At first, I thought it was the wind. Then I realized it was coming in intervals, slow and rhythmic. I grabbed my flashlight and I looked out one of the windows facing the stairs. Nothing. The forest below was pitch black. The noise stopped immediately. The next morning, I found a lower gate on the tower staircase hanging open. I knew I'd latched it before bed, and after that, I started feeling watched. You know that feeling when someone's staring at you? It became constant, especially near sunset. A few evenings later, I was making coffee when I happened to glance towards the trees west of the tower. And that's when I saw him. There was a figure standing in the tree line, perfectly still. Too far away to make out any details, but definitely human. I remember feeling relieved at first. I actually thought maybe another ranger had come by. I waved. The figure didn't move, didn't wave back, and just stood there, watching the tower. I kept staring maybe 30 seconds before grabbing the binoculars from the desk. But I looked again. The figure was gone. That night was the first time I locked the tower hatch. The next evening, right before sunset, I saw the figure again. Same spot, standing between the trees. Only this time, it looked closer. I tried convincing myself it was paranoia. Isolation can mess with your head. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. But things kept getting worse. 2 nights later, a storm rolled through the mountains. The kind that shakes the entire forest. Rain hammered the windows while thunder echoed across the valley. Around 11 p.m., The radio suddenly filled with static before cutting out completely. I tried calling the ranger station 3 separate times. Nothing. That's when I heard the first step. From below. I froze, and I heard another step, slowly climbing the metal staircase. I remember staring at the floor hatch, while the sound continued upward through the storm. The tower swayed slightly with each gust of wind, and somewhere below me, someone was climbing. I grabbed the emergency flare gun from the wall beside the bed. The footsteps kept coming. Then they stopped directly outside the hatch. Complete silence except for rain. I waited for the hatch handle to move. It never did. A minute passed, then another. I don't know how long I stood out there holding the flare gun before I finally worked up the courage to look outside. I shined my flashlight down through the cracks beside the hatch. Nothing. No one was on the stairs. No movement below. And somehow, no sound of anyone coming back down either. I didn't sleep that night. The storm finally cleared just before sunrise. The second it was bright enough outside, I unlocked the hatch and checked the staircase. Once again, there was no footprints. No mud. Nothing. Then I noticed the window beside my cot. There was a handprint pressed against the outside glass. Mud smeared across the edges. The problem was, the handprint was too high to reach up from the staircase outside, at least 7 feet above the platform. I packed my things immediately. When the ranger arrived later that morning, I told him everything. The footprints, the figure, the climbing, and the handprint. He listened quietly the entire time. Then he asked me something that made my stomach drop. He said, "You saw someone standing near the west tree line?" I nodded. And for a few seconds, he just stared out toward the forest, before finally saying, "You're not the first person to report that." I quit the same day. Years later, I tried finding information about the tower online. I found an old forum where former rangers talked about strange experiences there. Most of it sounded like ghost stories, except for one detail. Almost every person mentioned seeing someone standing silently near the trees at sunset, watching the tower, and always getting a little closer each night. A few years ago, 3 friends and I decided to go camping deep in the Appalachian Mountains. Not an actual campground. We wanted somewhere isolated. No cabins, no tourists, no other people around for miles. At the time, it sounded fun. Now I can't even look at photos from that trip. There were 4 of us in total. Me, my friend Aaron, his cousin Tyler, and a guy named Nate, who claimed he knew the area really well. According to Nate, there was an old trail leading to the clearing near a creek about 6 miles into the forest. He said barely anyone went there anymore. That should have been the first warning. The hike started normally enough. The woods were beautiful at first. Huge trees, fog hanging low between the hills, the sound of water somewhere in the distance. But after about 2 hours, I noticed something strange. The forest was quiet. Not a peaceful quiet, but dead quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing. Even our first steps sounded wrong somehow, like the woods were swallowing the noise. I remember joking about it to Aaron, but he admitted he noticed it too. Nate just shrugged it off and kept walking. Around sunset, we reached the clearing. It was a small, maybe 30 feet across, surrounded by thick trees on every side. A narrow creek ran nearby, and in the middle of the clearing, there was an old stone fire pit filled with wet leaves. That part bothered me. If nobody camped there anymore, why was there still a fire pit? But we were already exhausted, so we set up a camp anyway. For the first couple hours, everything felt normal. We made food, talked, listened to music quietly from a speaker. Eventually the fire burned low, and one by one everyone crawled into their tents. I stayed awake longer than the others. I never slept well outdoors. Around midnight, I heard whistling. Faint, far away. At first I thought it was the wind moving through the trees, but then I realized it was a tune. Somebody was whistling an actual melody somewhere in the forest. I sat up immediately. The sound was distant enough that I couldn't tell what direction it was coming from. It lasted maybe 10 seconds before stopping completely. I almost woke the others, but honestly, I didn't want to sound paranoid, so eventually I laid back down. About an hour later, it happened again. Same tune, except much closer this time. I unzipped the tent slightly and looked outside. The fire was nearly dead, barely glowing red in the darkness. The trees behind the camp looked completely black. Then the whistling stopped abruptly. Like whoever was making it realized I was listening. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning I asked if anyone else heard it. Aaron nodded immediately. He thought it sounded like someone walking through the woods while whistling to themselves. Nate insisted it was probably another camper, but Tyler looked genuinely nervous, because during that night, someone had moved his backpack. None of us admitted to touching it. At first we thought somebody was messing with us, but then we noticed the footprints. There were muddy tracks circling the campsite, not hiking boots, bare feet. I still remember how strange they looked. The steps were too spread apart, like whoever made them had unusually long legs. Aaron wanted to leave right then. Nate convinced us we were overreacting. He said we already hiked too far to turn back early. I wish we had ignored him. The second night was worse. Way worse. The woods became quiet around sunset. No wind. No animal sounds. Nothing. And sometime after dark, the whistling came back. Only now it was coming from a different direction. First somewhere far out to our left, then deeper in the woods behind us. Then off near the creek. The same exact tune every time. Like multiple people were repeating it to each other through the trees. At one point, Aaron flashed his flashlight toward the forest, and for maybe a half a second, we saw eyes reflecting back. High off the ground, higher than the normal person's head. The eyes disappeared the second the flashlight beam hit them. Nobody spoke after that. We just sat there silently around the fire listening. Around 3 a.m., we finally crawled into our tents. That's when we heard footsteps again. Slow footsteps circling the camp. Leaves and sticks snapping one at a time. The footsteps moved carefully around the tents without stopping. None of us moved. None of us even spoke. Then the whistling started again, right beside the tent. Not distant anymore. Close enough that it sounded like a person was standing inches away from us. Tyler panicked. Before any of us could stop him, he unzipped the tent and shined the flashlight outside. Nothing. No person. No movement. But hanging from the tree branch near the fire pit was our metal cooking pot, swinging slowly back and forth. The sound echoed through the clearing. I don't think any of us slept after that. The second the sun started coming up, we packed everything and left. Nobody even ate breakfast. We just wanted out of those woods. But after hiking for nearly 3 hours, we realized something was wrong. We kept passing the same fallen tree. Some broken trail marker. Same creek bend. At first we thought we were imagining it. Then Aaron pointed at the symbol carved into one of the trees. A circle with a line through it. He scratched it there earlier that morning to mark our direction. We somehow walked into a massive loop. Panic hit us immediately. Nate kept insisting we were just turned around, but even he looked scared now. It took another 4 hours before we finally found the trail leading back to the parking lot. And when we got there, all 4 doors on Nate's car were open. The inside smelled damp, like wet dirt. Nothing had been stolen, nothing broken, but muddy footprints covered the seats and floorboards. Like someone had been sitting inside waiting for us. None of us ever went camping together again. Tyler refuses to talk about the trip entirely. And sometimes late at night, when everything's quiet, I still catch myself listening to the whistling outside. There's a national park about 45 minutes from my hometown that I've been visiting since I was a kid. My dad used to take me there every fall. Same trails, same lake, same forest. After he died, I still went a few times every year. It always felt familiar. That's why what happened there still bothers me so much. Last October, I decided to spend a weekend camping there alone. I'd never actually gone by myself before. Usually I brought friends or family. But life got busy, and honestly, I just wanted quiet for a couple of days. The first day felt normal. Cold air, orange leaves everywhere, the smell of wet pine drifting through the woods. I followed the same trail I walked dozens of times before, and set up camp near a creek about 5 miles from the main road. By sunset, though, the forest started feeling different. It was hard to explain. The woods suddenly felt bigger than I remembered, darker too. Even familiar landmarks looked wrong somehow. That night, I sat by a fire for maybe an hour before climbing into my tent. And that's when it hit me. I was completely alone out here. No voices, no cars, no distant sounds. Just trees. The silence started getting to me fast. Every tiny noise outside the tent suddenly sounded huge. Branches snapping, leaves moving, something shifting in the dark. I barely slept. Sometime around 3 a.m., I woke up because I heard something breathing outside the tent. I froze immediately. The sound circled around the campsite once before stopping near the creek, then completely silent. I stayed awake until sunrise. The second it got light outside, I decided I was leaving early. I packed everything in under 10 minutes and started hiking back toward the trailhead. At least, I thought I did. After nearly 2 hours of walking, I realized I'd never crossed a wooden bridge near the stream. That should have happened within the first 30 minutes. At first, I assumed I took a wrong turn somewhere, but the trail looked unfamiliar now. The trees were denser. The path was narrower. and there were no markers anywhere. That's when I started panicking. I pulled out my phone, and no signal. I kept walking faster, hoping I'd eventually reconnect with the main trail. Instead, the woods just kept getting thicker. Around noon, I found the husk. At first, I thought it was a dead tree. It stood upright, between the trees about 20 feet off the trail, tall and dark, split down the center. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a tree anymore. It looked almost human, like something had grown around the body long ago. The bark curved outward like ribs. The inside was hollow, completely black inside. And the opening in the trunk looked disturbingly similar to a mouth hanging open. I remember getting this horrible feeling standing near it. Like I shouldn't even be looking at it. Then I noticed the smell. Rot. Like something was decaying. I backed away immediately. That's when I heard movement inside the husk. A shifting sound. Slow scraping from the deep within the hollow center. I got out of there as fast as I could. I didn't even think. I just started running blindly through the forest. Branches hitting my face, leaves crunching under my boots, and behind me. I heard something moving too. Heavy impacts against the ground. I remember hearing trees creaking nearby as whatever it was moved through the woods behind me. Then came the sound that still makes my stomach turn whenever I think about it. The breathing. The same wet breathing I heard outside my tent. Only much louder now. Closer. I finally stopped running when I reached a clearing near an old ranger cabin. The building looked abandoned, but I didn't care. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it. Inside smelled like mold and wet wood. Most of the windows were boarded up except one facing the forest. That's where I saw it. Standing at the edge of the trees. I couldn't even process what I was looking at. It was tall enough that its head brushed low branches. Its body looked stretched and uneven, like bark and bone fused together. Long arms hanging nearly to the ground. And its chest. It looked hollow. Like the inside of a tree husk. The thing stood completely still, watching the cabin. Then slowly it tilted its head. The cracking sound that came from the neck genuinely made me feel sick. I remember backing away from the window while trying not to make a noise. Then the creature took a single step forward into the clearing. Its joints sounded like splitting wood. Then suddenly the entire cabin shook. Something slammed against the outside wall hard enough to knock dust from the ceiling. The boards covering the windows rattled violently. I thought the cabin was going to collapse. Then everything stopped. No footsteps, no breathing, nothing. I stayed hidden inside for hours. Eventually, sometime near sunset, I worked up the courage to look outside again. The clearing was empty. Carved into the dirt outside the cabin was a long trail leading back toward the forest, like something enormous had dragged itself away. I found the main trail less than 15 minutes later. The strange part, it was close enough that I should have seen it all day. I never went back to that park again. And a few months later, I found an old online forum talking about strange sightings in that area. One post mentioned hikers finding hollow trees shaped like people deep in the woods. Another person claimed that park rangers used to avoid certain trails after dark. But the final post was what bothered me most. It simply said, "If you find an empty husk, run."